Welcome back to the Groundless Ground podcast, the leading edge of integrative mental health. I'm your host, Lisa Dale Miller. You can subscribe to, download, and review the Groundless Ground on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn, and of course, find out more at groundlessground.com. I'm ready to go. How about you? This dialogue with visionary psychotherapist Gina Ross, a pioneer in understanding and healing collective trauma, is both informative and so deeply moving. A Syrian Jew with empathy for both Israeli and Arabic cultures, Gina has devoted her life's work to resolving the societal and individual dysregulation that underlies trauma and ultimately feeds all forms of violence, hatred, and greed. Gina discusses the role of trauma in conflict zones such as the Middle East and how to heal that trauma and bring about personal and collective peace using integrative methodologies. Her Ross model and its practical application, Emotion Aid, have been successfully deployed in Israel and Palestine and other conflict zones to help heal traumatized citizens and military personnel. In concert with an Israeli clinical research team, Gina recently published a widely read, peer-reviewed control group study of somatic experiencing. The episode starts with Gina's personal history and how it informed her genuine understanding of collective trauma. She then offers in-depth information about successful treatment of PTSD using SE, somatic psychotherapy, emotion aid, and integrative medicine. We finish with a frank discussion about the lack of robust research on the SE method and how this unfortunate situation can be remedied. Gina Ross, it is a distinct honor for me to have you give me even a little of your time to be on the Groundless Ground podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you. That's very lovely.
You have been doing cutting-edge work for a long time. So you are the founder and president of the International Trauma Healing Institute, and that exists both in Israel as well as in the United States.
That's right.
Give me a sense of what the Institute is about and how you got interested in healing collective trauma, especially in the Middle East.
It all started with Peter Levine, the creator of Somatic Experiencing. There was one sentence, and the mission of my life got designed on that day. And what he said was that trauma was at the root of violence. Instinctively, immediately what came to my mind, I have to take this to the Middle East. And I remember at some point I was talking to him about it and I was crying, and he said something very beautiful. He said, "Those are the tears of somebody who has found her mission." The journey started then. I thought I would take Peter to Israel, drop him there, and bye-bye birdie, I'll go back to my nice little life. I was a therapist, I'm painting, I had a wonderful house and family all over the world, right? So I take him there, and then the Intifada broke out, and nobody would go to teach there anymore.
Which Intifada are we talking about?
The second Intifada lasted, I think, 5 years or 6 years. I lived in Israel when I made Aliyah to there in 1970. For 9 months, I had gotten a scholarship for Bezalel, which is the art institute. And I met my husband-to-be and I left. But I left my heart there. I have a lot of relatives there, probably in the hundreds.
Your family is originally
from Syria. My family has been in Syria since biblical times, we believe. Eventually, some of them moved to Israel, but a lot of them went all over the place, including Brazil and France and Italy and Japan. And my husband used to call me the Jewish mafia, that we were all over the world. We ran away when I was really a baby overnight. That was when the partition happened for Palestine, was announced, and that's when the Jews' lives became imperiled in Syria. And my mother's cousin chartered a plane in Lebanon and sent it to us, and we were the last plane to leave before they closed the door on the Jews. At that moment, we went to Lebanon. We had a wonderful life there. In the beginning of the civil war started, there was a bomb in the government's offices, and it was in the same street that we lived, and the bomb touched somewhat our building too. And my mother said, "Okay, time to go again." And we left overnight, leaving everything behind us. And I didn't see my pictures of being a baby until I was 23 when I went to Israel, and my aunt had received some pictures from my mother. So we left. Our picture was taken in Turkey because we were the last plane to leave before they closed the airport because American troops were arriving. And then we ended up in Italy and Switzerland for a year and then moved to Brazil. And then I made Aliyah to Israel. I met my husband, ended up living in Canada and the United States. By the way, I traveled very extensively around the world for a whole year with my husband. And then I traveled all my life, probably to like 70, 80 different countries. And I lived in 8 different countries on 4 different continents. And I speak several languages. So that's the story.
You have such an international history. It seems as though you've been applying your methodology not just to Israelis, but also to Palestinians.
Right. What makes us the same and what makes us different? Seems that everything came together for my mission without me knowing that I was preparing for something. Although there was a sense that something needed to be done. I was interested in doing transpersonal therapy at the time. Trauma was not at all on my radar screen. I didn't want to have anything to do with trauma. And when Peter said those words, something really moved very deeply. And I really felt that if I took that to Israel, everything will be fine. That was a naivete, right?
Yes.
When I took Peter to Israel, we had a very big conference. It was very successful. I brought 20 people with us, assistants and different therapies also. And there was one psychiatrist that Peter did a demo on him, and he was a Holocaust survivor psychiatrist, very well known in Israel. And he said, if there is SE in the Middle East, there will be peace. That was the strength of understanding what could happen.
Yes.
And that's when those movements about understanding about the nervous system started coming up. And I thought I had no intention to be teaching anything. And then all of a sudden, there I am teaching and giving my life to train 500 therapists. That's not what I'm thinking is going to be effective enough. So I wrote a book. My first book was for the media, to engage the media in healing. As I researched the book, I realized that they also traumatized the public, not only healed it. And it was a very friendly book that I wrote. It wasn't an accusatory book. And while I was writing that, I started seeing all the other social sectors that were involved. And that's when the Ross model started emerging. And I didn't call it that way. In Israel, they called it that way and adopted the name. And that was the idea of identifying the 10 different sectors that interface with trauma, either creating it or healing it or both. To penetrate each sector with the right information about what trauma is, how people in that sector get traumatized and how they can be healed, and what was the impact of that. And hopefully, if we did a good pilot for each sector, we would show what works, and then they could institutionalize it in their essential basic trainings. We didn't have to come and try to hit every person, but that naturally a whole country can end up being trained in understanding what trauma is, which was a big thing at the time. You know, that was before trauma came out of the closet with 9/11. And how could we bring self-regulation at a national level?
You've just said a lot, and there may be some things that either listeners don't understand or they don't have a context for, because I think you and I can both agree that trauma healing has not always included the nervous system responses and the body. Trauma therapists were just working on thoughts and memories and only thinking there was a mind and a brain.
And because it was so difficult to heal, there was a huge stigma on trauma.
I would say it was quote unquote difficult to heal because the physical system, the autonomic nervous system, all that dysregulation was completely left out.
Right. And they didn't really understand the basis of trauma. They did not understand that it was based on the dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system.
What I heard you say is with the Ross model, the idea was to implement a basic understanding of dysregulation in the ANS and how that not just gets triggered, but maybe is in a person's system in a particular way when they live in a daily environment in which trauma is continually part of the environment. Would you agree?
Yeah, but I think it's actually true for all of us today. I used to think that the fulcrum was Israel and what was happening between Israel and the Palestinians. That was the main movement. But today I can say trauma is everywhere. Dysregulation is everywhere. It's behind the huge political polarization that's existing right now here in this country. It's
Yes.
behind what's happening between different cultures and civilizations and religions. It's behind everything that's going on.
This is a unique view,
The view that I have,
the one you've just presented. I'll go further. Do you think this is a unique view among the clinical trauma community?
when I went to Israel in 97 to spur some interest in that, where the psychiatrists were saying trauma is not curable.
Really?
Until that recently, and there are still people who don't know about SE and don't know about the somatic. I mean, we certainly have come a very, very, very long way. But we're not even at the 30% of where we need to be, because had we been there, people would have now invested huge amount of monies into the research, taken us much, much more forward. My whole struggle was trying to take SE into the Veteran Administration 10 years ago or 12 years ago. I basically said, well, go do your job and get your research done, and then we'll see. Really not being aware that something major was opening up in the field that will drastically change the field of therapy, not only trauma, but also of developmental trauma, the field of trauma, period. People who approach therapy without understanding that there's trauma in the system and that the autonomic nervous system is involved really are missing half of the boat. There's no two ways about it. I'm always evaluating which of my clients need to be put on any kind of help that facilitates the self-regulation, because 1 hour a week is not going to be enough when there is a tremendous dysregulation that has been lasting for many years and has established many layers of dysregulation in all of the different systems of the body.
What do you do in a case like that?
I have been very, very lucky to have a few people around me that are incredibly skilled, a master in functional medicine. Her name is Dr. Haila Kass, and she wrote a whole bunch of books. And I rediscovered Majid Ali, who is a doctor in Chinese medicine and has a wonderful capacity to diagnose a person at all levels, and then to also mix the right kind of herbs that are helpful for the person. So between those two, I feel very blessed to send my clients wherever they need to go. However, I don't cancel out medication. Medication can be extremely helpful for people. But what we're missing is that the people who are giving it are not understanding about the dosage necessarily. That's where applied kinesiology is very important, to have the help of somebody who can assess for each person what's going on. So between muscle testing, applied kinesiology, and alternative medicine, and the right, also understanding the right medicine. I'm going to take a little shortcut. We were trying to start a research for combat veterans for chronic PTSD in Israel.
Yes.
With soldiers, with veterans who had 10 years of therapy and they just got worse. We were putting together a program, and we really understood that even though SE was extremely helpful, it was never going to be enough. And we start approaching neurofeedback, cranial sacral, martial arts, different things that we can do with veterans to break through that unbelievable black hole of trauma that they're in. In my two institutes, and especially in the one in Israel where I'm working with my partner, Dr. Kati Lawi, we're very open to all of the different things that are happening, and we do not abide by any one special technique that has all the answers.
Yeah, so this is essentially the therapeutic interventional method that I've been using.
Right.
And I have my set of ancillary physicians and some of the other methodologies that you mentioned that I can refer people to, because you're right. Even if I were to see people more than once a week, if I don't have all the tools, maybe you'll agree with me, SE is a self-applied method. So we're training people in skills that they can use when they leave our offices.
That's what I've called the emotion aid, and we developed it very, very well in Israel. There's a tool with cards and support systems and all kinds of things that help. We have a CD called Brushing Your Nervous System. But even that is not enough for certain cases. But for the people who are really very deeply into it, they need something that is built into the system throughout the day that's delivering it, like the medication, like the functional medicine and supplements, delivering from inside of the body, not just their own effort. If I was to give you one message that I have found extremely useful and really caring, is to get off thinking that we can do it all just with SE or any other technique.
Yeah.
Give them the help to get the benefits of all the stuff around us. And for that, we have to give up our needing to be the best.
So you mentioned emotion aid. You've made it so practical and have wanted very much to deliver something to people that they can institute themselves without having a clinician facilitate.
Right.
Would you describe the intervention of emotion aid a little more in detail, just so people have a sense of
Yeah.
what it is?
It's really like taking the basics of somatic help and bringing it in a very simple way to the client. And certainly children are using it in a wonderful way. The people that as soon as they're going to open their body and go into their psyche are going to lose dual awareness, they're not going to be able to do emotion aid. It requires a certain level of stability in the nervous system before they can do that. For example, I had a meeting at the UN with the woman who was in charge of 15,000 social workers that were working with immigrants. And she had done a research and discovered that there was a very high percentage of secondary trauma in them. And we were working on being able to give them the delivery. And that's where emotion aid, or SE for that matter, becomes crucial against burnout for anybody who's working with trauma, which is already a huge amount of people. So you can clean up your nervous system every day. You can take it down to homeostasis. Learn to brush your nervous system every day. And then you're not going to fall into cumulative trauma.
So in other words, you're not spreading a virus.
You're not accumulating the illness so that the virus breaks out. We all have great resiliency up to a point. And research showed that therapists who were working with 60% of their clients traumatized ended up developing trauma as much as their clients. Learning what it means to track the nervous system and keep discharging whatever comes your way at any time.
That would be a continual process once you have the skill.
It's also for everything. In your relationship with your kids, partners, with your spouses, you can take any encounter and make it a trauma vortex event or help keeping it into a healing vortex event.
One of the things I think you might be able to relate to, when I came back from Kosovo, most people couldn't relate. I'd never lived in a place where there was so much visceral hatred toward another group of people who were right there with you. It was so confusing for me to be in the midst of that kind of hatred.
And heartbreaking too.
It was all kinds of things. It made me think about when I lived in Israel back in 78. I wonder if the collective, continual generational separation between the Israelis and most of the Arabs, not just the Palestinians, this feeling of separateness, whether you think that has roots in the collective buildup of trauma in the nation's nervous system, in all those nations' nervous systems.
Absolutely. I think it has to do with the buildup of trauma. I'm going to say something, I don't know how that's going to sound for people, but you see, the last book that I haven't written yet is the one for the clergy. What happens, there are historical periods where the religious leader of a group in the trauma vortex will traumatize the people under them and will traumatize that culture and will strengthen the separation, the us and them part of the religion. Every religion has its own container, and then it has its particular side, and then it has its universalist side. When they're in the trauma vortex, they go only on the particular, and then they can't see the universal container where everybody belongs.
The sameness.
The sameness. You know, when people talk about God and how it's invented by men and all of that stuff, and they say, well, look at this. We actually have a pineal gland that produces DMT for spirituality and cosmic knowledge. And I say, what better proof that there is something out there than to have our body containing the tools for it? I think that there is more than we think about it in terms of political trauma, and there's also religious trauma. But I also want to say the Middle East, meaning Palestinian-Israeli conundrum, is not at all a local conundrum, is a worldwide conundrum, and involves everybody who is from an Abrahamic religion.
I agree.
The reason why I'm very hopeful and I don't get despaired when I look at the mess that's going on is something that happened in 1964, where the Vatican came up with a document called Nostra Aetate. Nostra Aetate was the Vatican's decision to say that the Jews did not kill Christ, that Christianity is emerged from Judaism, needs to make its peace. And just a couple of years ago, they even said the people that can go to heaven without interjection of Christ are the Jews. Wow, after 2,000 years of absolute mess and trauma and what was created, you have now a whole body of 1.5 billion people represented by the Vatican taking the decision to confront one of the main dogmas of replacement theology and do something about it. If that was possible, anything is possible now. That was one of the clearest, impactful example of collective healing vortex that we can bring up, talk about, give us an example, and let it guide how we're going to look at other things. The King of Spain apologized to the Jews 400 years after the expulsion of the Inquisition. I'm waiting for what's going to happen for the Kurds, for what's going to happen for the Armenians, for what's going to happen to all of the traumatized populations that are still carrying that.
For the Palestinians?
For the Palestinians, it's a little bit different because it's part of something different than just the Israeli-Palestinian conundrum. There's something much bigger than that. I speak Arabic. I taught in Ramallah in Arabic. I have very good connection with Arabs. I feel very at home with the Arabs. My emotional home, really. And I went to Gaza and I spoke with people and I speak with Palestinians all the time. The ones that are not in the trauma vortex, they know that we can live together. They know that they can have a very different life. But the Palestinian cause has been used by this bigger umbrella of the Abrahamic religion. And until that is pointed out and taken care of,
Yes.
It's intractable. So you want to go into the collective, I'll take you there.
Okay.
If a conflict is intractable, it's because all of its dimensions have not shown up. You know how we talk in SC about undercoupling?
Yes.
So it's just now starting to uncouple the undercoupling and the overcoupling of what's contained in that.
So for people who don't understand what we're talking about with undercoupling and overcoupling, would you just say a little bit about those two things? Right now, we're actually treading on very dynamite-like territory, and you and I are not holding dynamite sticks.
Over association, that's for overcoupling, and undercoupling where elements haven't showed up yet. They're impacting it. And if you want an understanding of this, I have a piece on my website that's called The Missing Piece in the Middle East. It really shows the 10 or 12 major forces around the world that are impacting this problem. The moment we keep something in a place that is not true, we cannot find a solution. There are potentials for good things to happen. I'm really very, very hopeful of the future. I think our work, the people that want to be the aware people, is to seed the collective consciousness, not to be overly impressed by the trauma vortex, and not to take sides, and not to go crazy, and not to get polarized, and see where can we bring that healing vortex. And if whatever I'm planning does not take care of everybody, that means I'm in the trauma vortex.
So if it's not mutually beneficial,
it's not the healing vortex.
Not just not the healing vortex, but it's also not an expression of the sameness.
Actually, I did something called like Bayan work. I don't know if you've heard about Bayan work.
I have not.
The basic understanding that I have is that every person is playing a part for the whole group. When we think we're actually divided and we're so different from each other, actually each part in the whole is playing a part that the whole needs to contain. When we are in the trauma vortex, we are presenting in a place that's impossible to be heard by the other.
And why is that?
Because we go into polarization, so we cannot see the point of view of the other. If I'm polarized, if I'm traumatized right now, my nervous system is off balance. You come to me with your problems. Do you think I have any patience for it? Forget it. I'm just worried about myself.
So this is how trauma impacts connectedness,
relationship,
and relationality.
Not only that, and here's the worst, is that I'm going to take whatever's coming out of me that I'm not aware of, and I'm going to project it on you.
So if I were to play devil's advocate and I were to say some polarization might in fact have roots in a wise view as opposed to a diluted view.
Everything that people are fighting about have a kernel of gold in it.
Yes.
When people are coming with their values and they're understanding what their values and what they're defending, that's
Yes.
fine. Now watch how much of where you're coming from have layers of trauma that stops you from looking at the gold of the other. It's not about giving up our values at all.
Right.
It's about freeing them up from the activation, from the excess charge that actually then will make dialogue possible. And to even pretend or think that we have hold of the whole truth, how arrogant is that?
Indeed.
How uncompassionate is that? How traumatic and traumatizing is that?
What you're speaking now is an ultimate wisdom that I think is collectively applicable no matter what view you hold.
That's right.
It's a way of being with others that goes beyond agitation. You can rest even in something that is other than.
Exactly. You said it beautifully. I was doing some of those trainings that I have that are made of 1 day of emotion aid and 2 days or 3 days of conflict resolution and communication. And I remember some of the peace activists in Israel coming to me and saying, you know, it really blows our mind. We're therapists, we are kind, caring people, and we find ourselves carrying so much anger and hatred to the other. I said, yes, because you're coming from the trauma vortex to your cause. And that's why you're getting exactly the opposite results of what you want.
One of the things that I've done in my private practice to cultivate this in myself, I work with Palestinian patients.
Mhm.
There's a big Palestinian community here with varying ranges of when they came to America and what they experienced, how old they were during all these intifadas. I find that when I do this, it helps me drop into a place that is beyond the conflict. It's healing for them to have a Jewish therapist in that place with them because they can see it's possible.
That's wonderful. You're making me think about a training I did in Germany with my partner, Kati, who is second generation Holocaust survivor.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like a Jewish Syrian refugee with 70 German social workers who were working with Syrian immigrants. It was so amazing because the circle just closed. The moment that we drop out of the trauma vortex, in the healing vortex, we all have the same autonomic nervous system and we all had the same universal basic needs.
Indeed.
Once I got that, the political stuff got managed by what I call the healing vortex in the body. And that's what I'm looking for is simplicity so that we can really go wide. We can't just afford to be taking care of people that can afford to come to therapy.
It's true. Yeah.
And also the power of prevention through emotion aid. People can prevent being traumatized. There was a girl who was living on Machane Yehuda, which is the street where the buses run in Jerusalem. And a lot of the initial suicide bombings were happening there. So she saw one. She witnessed one coming out of her apartment. She got very dysregulated, could not function, could not go to work, etc. And she went to see one of my students. And in one session, he helped her discharge the event, and she went back to normal. A year later, she gets out of her apartment again, and another suicide bombing takes place in front of her. What does she do? She stays calm and walks towards the event in order to help the people. She had been inoculated, and we can exercise our emotional muscles like we exercise our physical muscles. That's what emotion aid is about.
So she'd been inoculated not because she had one session that allowed the nervous system to release the first trauma, but maybe because she had one session and was given a set of tools that she practiced.
I don't think she was given the set of tools then, but I think that what happened, she had the neural pathway of what to do.
This is really interesting because it doubles back to my question about, is trauma different? Does it express differently in nervous systems of people who are living day to day in trauma vortex environments?
Yes, their coping mechanisms are different. Not only their coping mechanisms, it's their meaning for life, the blueprint for faith. How is it working for them? For example, there was a study that was done in Israel, and the people who were religious, that were living in the most traumatic scenarios, were the ones that got less traumatized because of their faith. We're talking about many different things that affect the resiliency and the resolution of trauma. when I was talking about seeding the collective nervous system and seeding the nervous system of our clients, the mind of our clients, with what is possible is very important. And so often when we see tragedy, we go, oh my God, yeah, I can understand. There is no way to get out of that. And we forget to hold the healing vortex in our brain. I want to share one very poignant little incident in the book, Sophie's Choice. This older, wonderful Polish man who says, it will not be in my lifetime, but I know that my Poland will come back to being good and fine. There is the projection of the healing vortex, irrelevant of him, beyond his life. And that's what helped him. All trauma vortexes pass. The difference is there can be a lot of destruction until they're over.
Yes.
And also, if they're not addressed and healed properly, they will reenact again. So need to understand that at the individual level, but even more importantly, at the collective level.
So far, you and I have been very clearly saying there is a way of viewing trauma, which includes the nervous system, and trauma healing, which is about regulation in the nervous system, that we both feel is effective as a method for resolving trauma and being able, as you have beautifully pointed out a few times, going on and being in traumatic events differently. I think we should tread on the really difficult territory of why is it so hard to get empirical research to actually prove what you and I are talking about. So everyone knows you are probably the only clinician who has done an empirical study that is peer-reviewed on somatic experiencing. Why is there so little research? It's very frustrating for all of us. Why is it so difficult to come up with research methodologies that can actually prove empirical efficacy for this method?
It's not difficult at all.
Okay.
It doesn't require millions of dollars, but it requires a couple of 100,000. It requires hiring experienced researchers. What happens is we're all this like wonderfully idealistic people, but we're just therapists. We're not researchers. And we're just getting excited and impulgated and, oh, we're going to go and do research. And then when I looked at now different things that have been proposed to me, because people like think of me as an expert, I'm not. I understand some basic stuff. And none of these wonderful projects that are a nice little addition are going to do the job of confirming our research and taking it further into the field. No serious journal will take your research if you're not working with a control group, period. That's it.
So does that mean we have to come up with an appropriate control for the SE model?
It could be like a group that waited for 3 months and then we give them the therapy. Or it could be a group that is getting another therapy, not SE, treatment with EMDR, treatment with PE. It depends how far you want to go.
Okay.
Then you can do, let's say, eating disorders or car accidents. Can you imagine if somebody took on car accidents right now and showed that people who get SE right after their car accident do not develop trauma and save millions of dollars to the insurance companies? Anything done in the physical health field of SE will resolve our problems with healthcare. You know, it's amazing. The impact would be tremendous. What I think we need to do is hire as a consultant people like Dr. Danny Brum, who did my research, even I would say Bessel van der Kolk, people who have done the research, who have been published, who have been successful, and say, please look at our design and tell us if that's worth it or not. What does it mean? Everything is worth it if we already were there. You can indulge in any little thing that you want, in any wonderful little detail that you want. But if we want SE to be known worldwide, that there shouldn't be one practitioner who doesn't take SE. Every practitioner has to have SE and EMDR.
You practice both SE and EMDR.
I do EMDR when I need to.
Would you say you could delineate the main difference?
Anything that is deeply set into the autonomic nervous system needs SE. And that's why a lot of EMDR people take SE.
Right.
EMDR has done a beautiful job with the belief system. It's very fast. SE can do it, but it's not as automatic because it's in the realm of the neocortex. And EMDR goes right hemisphere, left hemisphere, and connects it.
You're talking about the eye work.
The bilateral stimulation, whichever way it happens, visually, kinesthetic, or auditory.
EMDR has had a tremendous amount of research.
It has trained many, many, many more people than us. Thousands and thousands and thousands more.
It's true, but I don't think that's what has made it a more easily studyable method. SE is not taught in a standardized way.
We designed the protocol and we got away with it. It's fine. This is a false obstacle.
Good. So what I really want you to say, because I read your study, but a lot of the SE people, they don't even know you did a study. So I want you to describe the research protocol.
Protocol basically had 15 steps, which really wasn't about like, oh, this is what you do first and second session, third session, but these are all the elements that need to be addressed in a SE therapy. And it had a certain order, but it wasn't by any means stuck like I can only do this and that. And we had like 15 sessions. Sometimes we did 16 if we needed. I supervised every therapist, every 3 sessions. I gave them supervision to make sure that they were on the SE track. One of the preparation is to prepare people to do therapy for research, meaning to take clients that they're going to try to handle their PTSD in 15 sessions and not to get caught into the attachment issues, and to use the questionnaire that we have used. And I can't tell you the names right now. Everybody has access now just by going either on my website or on the website of the foundation to access it through the journal of stress. We came with excellent results, but we could have come up with absolutely out of order, beyond results. And Danny said, thank God we didn't, because they would not have believed us. So here are the obstacles where we were having. We were dealing with people that were not in a post-trauma situation, but in an ongoing traumatic situation. We had a guy who was the caretaker in the West Bank village. Whenever there was a terrorist attack, he's the one who went there to take care of the people and take care of all the details. He has done that for 20 years, but there was one incident because it was similar to something about his daughter. Boom, he just went into the trauma and he was doing brilliantly well. He was almost over with it. And another terrible incident where a baby they slit his throat, and that tipped him again. That was too much near the end of the 15 sessions. Well, we had too many cases that had to do with car accidents where people were in a court. So there was, secondary obstacles. If we had been doing this in another country or another time of peace, we had some cases where it was zero PTSD.
So this is a reproducible model for research.
All they have to do is take our stuff and rerun it again.
In a different country.
Different control group, whatever you want. We are actually right now in talk with the Israeli army to do one with combatant PTSD. Working with bureaucracies, it takes always time and we have to raise the money. But I think that there are wealthy people in the SE community, and they will only be motivated enough if they know that they're working with top people in the field.
Why is academia not interested?
That's not true. Danny Brum is very interested. He'll run another 10 things for you. I mean, I haven't explored the field here because I was doing it in Israel. Just explore with 1 or 2 people and get them and raise the $200,000, $300,000 and do it. So I'll tell you what was the obstacle before. I think there was a fear that we will not hold up under the scrutiny of research. We were so enamored of SE that if there was anything that would be against it, we will be devastated. We need to do control group. You're not accepted by academia. You're not going to spread worldwide.
You would think the SE community would learn from what's happened with mindfulness research over the last 15 years. Out of 1,500 studies, only 49 meet the criteria to say anything valuable about any of the mindfulness practices.
I think our worst enemy is how dreamers and idealistic and heart open we are. There isn't that intellectual playing by the rules because we have to, because we break all the rules. Remember, we're the only technique that teaches anybody SE. You know how much I get in trouble with the people who are licensed that we're putting SE in the hands of people who are not licensed therapists?
Ah,
Because we break the rules, we have to be very stringent about our research.
that would be a good area of research. I am one of those people who is very suspect about people who don't understand the concept of scope of practice working with people they shouldn't be working with. That actually would be an interesting research study. You have a research group where you're only getting SE from body workers. You have a research group where you're getting SE from clinicians who are SEPs. They're all doing the same protocol, and you would get to see whether or not there's a difference. And I think it would be great for us to have biological measures.
That would be great. It makes it a bit more complicated, but there's so many things right now we can use.
Did you get any feedback from ISSTS about your study and the use of SE as a modality for trauma healing?
No, what I got from the journal, an advice that we were one of the most read articles.
Really?
And we went through a very stringent review. We went back 4 times, took us a year to get it published.
Well, I'm not sure what the SE community would do without you. I'm also not sure that they have enough awareness how important what you have been bringing to the methodology really is, because nobody else in the SE community has standardized this.
There are quite a few people wanting to. We just need to give them the right foundation. The thing about it, though, it's very revolutionary. SE is extremely provocative.
Yes, it is.
And it goes against so many of the established understanding. Our hope is the new generation. I see with the new generation that I teach, no problems whatsoever. But I think we have to find a way to teach it in the universities, to bring it when people are learning already.
If there's anything you feel like you haven't gotten to talk about, I want to give you a chance to do that.
I think there is maybe one last sentence that I want to add for our American crowd. If you're clearly on one side of the spectrum, start listening to the other side.
Well, I think that is excellent counsel from someone that instituted that methodology extremely successfully in countries that are much more traumatized than ours. Gina, it's been a great honor, and I thank you so much.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To get in touch, please visit groundlessground.com. Let's dedicate our efforts to the healing of our planet and all its inhabitants. See you next time on the Groundless Ground.